Hello, welcome to Liberty Wolf, episode number 13. My name is Zach Strong, the creator of this podcast. I hope that if you are new, you will go back and listen to the other 12 podcasts to get up to speed and to kind of know where I'm coming from here, what my overarching principles are, what my worldview is. Now, this episode is going to be about election fraud. We just had a very contentious and very important midterm election. More money was spent in this than on any other midterm election in history. The media was insane. I mean, everyone at each other's throats. There are fake bombs being sent in the mail. There's all sorts of stuff going on. This was a very contentious, very contested and heated and important, again, election. Now, there are three major cases here that I want to talk about. Just kind of touch on the basics of, there are instances when the Republican won, the Democrat said no fair, and then suddenly, magically, a bunch of ballots start showing up by the thousands that, oops, we forgot to count these, that swing the election in the favor of the Democrats. This is happening in three major cases and in numerous smaller cases that aren't even being reported all across the country. The first one I'll talk about, just very briefly, is from Arizona. In Arizona, you had Kristen Sinema, the Democrat, who lost her election by more than 17,000 votes to the Republican, McSally. So this is what happened. When the polls closed on election night, McSally had won by 17,000 votes. But then magically, they found more votes. And then that lead dropped down to about 9,000. And then, what do you know? After that, they found even more votes. And the lead suddenly reversed. Instead of winning by 17,000, McSally was all of a sudden losing to Sinema. And then now the last report I've seen, I keep seeing conflicting numbers, but one of the last ones I saw was that now Sinema, the socialist twit in their running, she's now winning by 21,000 votes. Something in that ballpark. Now, how does it flip like that? Now, the law of averages would dictate that if you find a whole bunch of missing ballots, let's say 40, 50,000, as seems to be the case, then wouldn't at least some of those be for the Republican? But no, that's not what's happening. Every single one of those missing votes, those ballots that suddenly materialized out of thin air, every single one of them has been for the Democrat. Isn't that pretty incredible? Doesn't the law of averages dictate that at least some of those, maybe a few thousand at least, would be for the Republican? But nope. They're every single one of them for the Democrat. Even, they're finding a whole bunch, thousands of votes in Republican-dominated counties. And all of these votes are for the Democrats. If anyone believes this, that this is actually what's happening, there's no fraud going on, there's nothing duplicitous going on, then call me. I've got a bridge to sell you. It's insane to believe this. And it's happening all over the place. It's happening in Florida. In Florida, you have Gillum, the Democrat, the big-time socialist. He's just insane. He wanted huge corporate tax raises and everything else. I mean, he's crazy. The stuff he said is incoherent, gibberish. And yet, he lost his election by, what was it, 50-something thousand votes? And then magically, that lead dropped down to like 17,000, or somewhere in that ballpark. And then now they're talking about a big recount. Oh, maybe he'll win the election instead of the Republican DeSantis. And then you look at the counties, the major counties, Broward County there in Florida. Anyone who's, more than 10 years old knows all about Broward County in Florida. This is where the famous hanging chads were in the 2000 election. This is where they had the big recount between Bush and Gore in 2000. And it's some of the same election officials who were in charge there, who are running the same sort of fraudulent recount campaign as before. It's the same county. It's a laughingstock. People are calling it a banana republic online. And I can't disagree with that. Florida is a banana republic. Arizona is a banana republic. I mean, it's just absurd. Again, it stretches credulity to think that all of these votes that are being found, these tens of thousands of new votes that are just appearing out of thin air, that are growing up, sprouted up out of the ground, as it were, they're all for the Democrats. Isn't that incredible? I mean, think about it. Again, just the law of averages. Think about that. Just use some common sense and some basic logic, people. Wouldn't there be at least some of those newly found ballots that would be for the Republicans? How is it that every single one of these newly found ballots is for the Democrats? How is that possible? How is it possible? It stretches the imagination. You can't believe it. I'm sorry. If you believe that, again, I've got some real estate to sell you up on Mars. Prime real estate. Now, the other big race that's being talked about is the gubernatorial race in Georgia. It's a fairly slim margin, according to one newscast. It's only 68,000. I mean, I literally saw a news report that said that, where the lady newscaster was saying she just, Stacey Abrams, the Democrat, she just is losing right now just by a slim margin of 68,000. That's not a slim margin. Does anyone know how to do any basic math? I mean, trust me, I don't like math. I don't know advanced calculus or anything, but I can do basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. And, 68,000 is quite a lot. And yet, supposedly, they're finding all these new ballots. Wow. Where'd they come from? Who knows? But they're finding them, and they're all of them are in favor of Stacey Abrams, this big-time Bolshevik, socialist, insane person. For Stacey Abrams, it's all about race. And let's be honest, that's the only reason that she was even nominated, is because of her skin color. And the same thing with Gillum down in Florida. It's their skin color and this racial politics that propel them to the forefront. It doesn't help that it doesn't hurt that they're also socialists. And so Bernie Sanders, the admitted and avowed socialist, is campaigning for them. So they have the right ideology and they have the right skin color. And as for Stacey Abrams, she's the right gender. And the feminists love that. And if you listen to her talk, she is dumber than a bag of rocks. I mean, she really is. She is not very bright. It's just like all these big socialist candidates that the Democrats put out this year, like Beto down in Texas, who got his butt kicked. I mean, his name's not even Beto, by the way. I mean, he is so intellectually bankrupt. It's incredible. It's the same thing you look in Arizona again, back to Kristen Sinema. She's just a complete ditz. I mean, good job, Arizona, putting two women candidates to choose between. I mean, what could go wrong with that, right? And so you look at all these races that are going on, and every single one of them, all these votes that they're finding are going in favor of the Democrats. There's not a single one they're finding in favor of the Republicans. So again, law of averages, common sense. Please, have some common sense. And then you look at Georgia, where Stacey Abrams is refusing to concede defeat, even though she lost by 68,000 votes. If you look there, the judge on the district court, where if either campaign files a lawsuit, it has to go through the district court there. Her sister, Leslie Abrams, is on the district court. So you have this big conflict of interest. She's an Obama-appointed socialist judge there. And so this is the sort of thing we're dealing with. A complete conflict of interest everywhere you look. Down in Florida, you have the, I think was a Palm Beach, the election supervisors, they're threatening to arrest media who are filming the recounts. Oh, don't you want the recounts filmed? If it's so contentious, shouldn't you want them filmed? But no, they don't want them filmed. They don't want their fraud caught on camera. Heaven forbid. Even though, drum roll, it's already been caught on camera. They have videos of them taking away all these ballots in Florida, for example, throwing them onto pickup trucks, or semi-trucks, maybe it was. I forget. Anyway, throwing them onto trucks and hauling them away. Where'd those ballots go? Who knows? They just disappeared. And then in one of the videos, the person there, he's just filming this. He's just amazed that they're just taking out all these ballots. Where are they going? I don't know. And then so the election supervisor, she says, "Hey, come help me with these ballots." Just some random person. That's such a breach of protocol. It's incredible. Marco Rubio, who I really, really despise the man. He's a traitor to this country, in my opinion. But anyway, senator from Florida, he has been big on this, talking about all the election fraud going on. And he's pointed out under Florida law, for example, you have to have the votes counted by, what was it, Sunday, right? Yeah, all the early voting, absentee ballot, all that sort of stuff. You have to have it counted and reported by then. But now, all these days later, they're still counting them. It's such a breach and violation of the law. There's also the Governor Rick Scott. He was going over the various laws as well. Talking about, every 45 minutes they had to report in with the new vote tally. They stopped doing that. So all these protocols they did not follow. So in my opinion, the Florida race is going to go to DeSantis, the Republican, because it's going to go to court. I mean, if they even pass the recount stage, there are a couple different layers of recounting. There has to be a machine recount, which is going on. Then they have to do it by hand later, and it's very monitored by both sides. And so I don't think it's really going anywhere. And I think if it gets to the courts, it's going to be shot down because it's been so obvious. I mean, the courts have already preliminarily ruled against the Broward County election people. And so, but everywhere you're looking though, there's all this massive fraud. And so, if the courts have any honesty whatsoever, and let's face it, most of them don't, but there are still a handful of decent people out there wearing black robes. So if it goes to them, it's just so obvious, so blatant that I don't know how, with a race like Florida being watched as it is, that they can vote and side with the Democrats who are trying to steal the election. That's one of the things Governor Rick Scott said. He called it blatant fraud, and so that I will not stand idly by while unethical liberals try to steal the election. And that's really what's happening. It's unethical. Liberals, if you want to call them that. I don't really like the term liberal. I prefer socialist or communist because that's what they really are if you look at their principles. Liberal in the dictionary definition is a good thing. But liberal in the political sense means communist, Marxist, Bolshevik, socialist, progressive. But progressive, again, that's just another kind of red herring. It actually means socialist if you look at the principles. And that's what we should all be about. Principles, right? Principles over party. That was what my last episode number 12 of my podcast was about. Principles over party. Now, all around the country, though, there are all sorts of recounts going on. Here in Idaho, where I live, there's a race going on. There's a recount. The Democrat lost. He called for a recount. Now, it's a little bit more understandable because he only lost by 6 votes in that situation. Perhaps I'd ask for a recount as well. But it seems to always be the Democrats who ask for a recount. Think about it. I mean, in California, you have a whole bunch of Republicans that won smaller seats, and yet they're magically finding all these thousands of ballots, and the Republicans are suddenly behind now in those races. No one's even talking about those ones. It's all over the country, this sort of rampant fraud. It's a very one-sided fraud. Again, the law of averages would dictate that there would have to be at least some of those that would go in favor of the Republicans, right? Some of these recounts. But so far, at least according to what the media is saying, now the media, they're a bunch of liars. That's their profession. They lie. According to the media, all of the votes and all of the recounting is going in favor of the Democrats. Now, like I said, at the end of the day, after the courts get involved, the lawsuits happen, I think that at least some of these races will stay like they should be, such as in Florida. I believe DeSantis will have won at the end of the day there. I believe in Georgia, 68,000 votes is quite a lot, and that's what it was at the time the polls closed. So I think Stacey Abrams will go down in flames like the Hindenburg in Georgia. Arizona, who knows? Because now, according to all the counting, Sinema, this big socialist twit lady, feminist, she's ahead by tens of thousands of votes now, depending on which report you look at. And so they have a very real chance of stealing a number of elections. I want to say, I don't think I said this at the beginning. Anyone who's listened to me for very long knows that I despise both the Republican and Democratic parties. I often describe them as two sides of the same coin of currency that is now defunct, or they are two wings of the same bird of prey, and the American people is the prey. Right? There's not a dime's worth of difference between the two. There really isn't. In their rhetoric, yes, and in certain individuals here and there are some differences. Someone like a Ron Paul, he wasn't a true Republican. He was much more of a constitutionalist, but he bore the Republican label. So he's an example of someone who really wasn't a Republican. It's just that's what he had to do to get elected, call himself a Republican, because people are so partisan. If you have the R next to your name, well, they'll vote for you. Or if you have the D next to the name, oh, they'll vote for you. It doesn't really matter what your principles are. So if you look at the Republican and Democratic parties, they've combined this massive monopoly that I like to call the establishment. This establishment, they love their power. They hate each other. There's all sorts of infighting constantly. It's very cannibalistic, just like communism always is. But the one thing they can agree on, or one of the things, is that third parties and independent candidates should not be allowed to have a say. So they combine to hold them down, to make sure they're cheated out of elections. I mean, I have personal experience in this because I ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in Utah's 3rd District back in 2014, and I was officially banned from the debates illegally by the Republican state government in Utah. I talk about this a little bit in my last podcast. But so I have personal experience. I know firsthand that anyone who's a third-party candidate is hated by the establishment, is hated by the media. They're kept down. Because, again, the Republicans and Democrats, they're really the same. They have all this rhetoric. They get out there and fight, in the debates, and they send back and forth these hateful mailers and have these hateful advertisements, and it's all just hate, hate, hate. So it makes you think they really are just complete opposites, but they're not. Again, there are some individual exceptions to that. Some people are just blooming crazy, like Stacey Abrams. But if you look at the record of the Republicans and the Democrats when they've been in charge, when they've been at the helm in Washington, D.C., the record is stunning because you find that it's the same record with very, very minimal differences. It's the same record. Both parties, when they've been in charge, have taken us to illegal, unconstitutional wars. Both of them. Go look it up. Go see who presided over the various conflicts. Just in the last 17 years. Go look and see which presidents. You had Bush, the Republican. He took us into where? Afghanistan, Iraq, right? Some other places. Obama, what did he do? Well, he increased drone warfare. We bombed people all over the Middle East. We went into Syria. Hillary Clinton was fond of saying that they went into Libya. They came, they saw, and Gaddafi died, which was something, by the way, that Donald Trump had proposed doing years previous to that. He said there was a Holocaust going on in Libya, so we need to go in and kill Gaddafi. And then later, when he campaigned in 2016, he said, I never said that, but it's on video. He did say it. So both these sides, they do the same things. They increase the size of government. There's regulations, just massive bureaucratic regulations that have been set in place. Both parties preside over them. Healthcare. Both parties have done healthcare. Republicans and Democrats over the years, though they call it different names and different things and use different rhetoric, they promote the welfare state. Both parties have presided over the mass genocide of the unborn through abortion. Here's the thing. Let me give you a little secret here. The president, if he wanted to, today, he could end abortion in the United States. The president swears an oath to uphold the Constitution and has authority to execute the laws of the Union. Well, under the Constitution, life is protected. The right to life is protected. So he could, if he wanted to, if he had the cojones, he could step forward and end it tomorrow or today. He could end it. He doesn't have to go through the Supreme Court. I mean, Andrew Jackson, I think, proved that very successfully. It doesn't really matter what the Supreme Court says. They give opinions. They don't give rulings. They give opinions. And each branch has their own opinion. And when something violates the U.S. Constitution, it is unconstitutional, no matter where it comes from. It doesn't matter if it's the court saying it. If it goes against the United States Constitution, which is an act of the United States public, of the American people, then it is illegal, null, and void. So the president has every authority to end that if he wanted to. Any president. Bush, supposedly pro-life. Trump, supposedly pro-life. They could end it tomorrow. However, my point is that both the Republicans and the Democrats, they constitute this massive bureaucratic establishment. Trump has done a few good things. He's been the best president in my lifetime. That being said, I wouldn't ever vote for him because I don't agree with his principles. And he's an immoral man, has no spiritual discernment. He doesn't really understand the U.S. Constitution. And he has no grasp on conspiracy. That's why he keeps appointing these people to his cabinet in these various positions and then firing them months later because he finds out they're terrible. But he would have known they're terrible in the first place if he had any grasp on world politics, on conspiracy, on how communism works, on the ideology of this conspiratorial clique of gangsters that rules the world. But he doesn't, unfortunately. And so this bad situation that we're in, where everyone's at each other's throats, where there's all these recounts, where votes are being stolen, where the American public's opinion is just, thrown down the drain by scheming politicians. This has come about for a number of reasons, one being which we've abandoned God. That's the main one. But there are a number of other reasons. One of them is that we put our politics, we put our party loyalty above loyalty to principles. So I want to read a quote from John Adams. This was written on October 2nd, 1780. He said, quote, "There is nothing which I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leaders and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution." Close quote. George Washington, many of the founders, they spoke about this evil of faction, of being divided into these factions, these warring factions, because this is what happened throughout history. You had people, they divided along artificial lines, and then they went to war with each other. And right now, the Republicans and Democrats are pretty much at war with each other, even though at the top, they agree, the Republican and Democratic leadership, they're in concert one with another. The perception among the public is that they are opposites, and so they're going to war over these artificial distinctions. It's because they have this party loyalty. That's a huge part of it. And so when you look at the election fraud going on right now, that's completely one-sided, 100% in favor of the Democrats. All these magical ballots that they're finding are all in favor of the Democrats, not a single one in favor of the Republicans. Just remember that this is, again, a result of the fact that we've put party over principle. We've abandoned our principles, and instead we have these allegiances to our group. It's how communism works. They divide and they conquer. They divide people into groups. Gays over here, lesbians over there, straight heterosexual over there, white people over there, Republicans over there, blacks over here, Democrats over there, and so forth. They divide everyone, so everyone is at each other's throats because they've been divided. They don't have a common sense of values, and they don't have a common worldview. They don't have an American heritage, our Christian, constitutionalist, pro-liberty, pro-family heritage. That's been stripped away by dividing everyone into these groups. And so these little groups go on, they fight each other, and this allows evil, conniving people at the top to manipulate everyone, to steal elections, to change the laws in spite of the Constitution, to do all these things, and basically to commit treason against the American people. If the American people ever woke up, if they ever truly woke up and understood what our founding fathers wanted this country to be, if they ever woke up and looked at the United States Constitution, if they ever woke up and actually looked at what their leaders were doing, regardless of the R or D next to their name, they'd realize, wow, we've been essentially, taken over by this ruling clique of gangsters. They have an R, and sometimes they have a D next to the name. Doesn't matter. They're both colluding with each other. That's where the real collusion is. And they have this ideology, this Marxist Bolshevik ideology. They have this centralization scheme that they're going for. They want to strip the states of their rights. They want to strip the American public of their rights, individuals of their rights, and consolidate it all into this collectivist, socialist government in Washington. It's a bloated bureaucracy. And they flip out whenever anyone challenges that. And so they have to pull out all the stops and cheat and lie And they put up these racially motivated candidates like Stacey Abrams to try to pull on the heartstrings of the people to get them elected so that they retain their power in Washington. That's what it's about, the power. It's not about wealth. I mean, wealth is a means to power, but it's all about the power, about their ideology. These people are anti-Americans, the people who are controlling these things. I mean, I've written 2 books on the communist conspiracy, A Century of Red and Red Gadians. Those are the titles. And I tried to get through to people that behind all of this is a communist ideology. It's a satanic, Luciferian, occultist, evil, devilish, malevolent, malicious ideology. It's an ideology of death. It's a death cult. It's a murder cult. One of the things they murder is truth. Just yesterday, November 11th, Facebook deleted a group that I had. It was called World War Truth. It was about the truth of World War I and II. Previously, they had deleted a page that I had called World War II Truth and Lies. They've temporarily unpublished pages, other pages I've had. They've revoked my publishing rights or posting rights a number of times. So I know firsthand that freedom of speech, anyone who speaks out, that's being criminalized, basically. It's being silenced. And that brings me back to what I was been talking about today. We need to step forward, let our voices be heard, because they are trying to silence us, this establishment, this political ruling class. They're trying to silence your voices and by stealing the votes, by stealing these elections. And again, I hate the Republican Party and I hate the Democratic Party. Both are so corrupt. They both need to implode and be kicked into the dustbin of history. However, that being said, the Democrats, they don't even pretend. The Republicans pretend to be good. The Democrats don't pretend. That's really the main difference. The Democrats are outright socialists. The Republicans, a lot of them are socialists. They just pretend to be conservatives. Republicans. So that's what it's about. Stealing power for this ruling communist clique that's taken over this country, has destroyed our cultural institutions, that has pitted us against each other, that has made it so that a black woman like Stacey Abrams can use her skin color as a qualification for office. Why should that qualify anyone for office? Why? Shouldn't we put our principles first, our ideology first? Shouldn't we put a common American heritage of freedom and liberty, sometimes called the American gospel? This gospel of liberty. Shouldn't we put that first? Shouldn't the Constitution, which is an act of the whole people, which is the supreme law of the land, no matter whether you live in socialist California or wonderful Idaho, shouldn't we put our ideology first? But no. We have this group of people trying to steal power. And so it's in their best interest to keep us divided, to put us against each other. And that's what's going on. That's what the media, they're really fueling this fire right now. Trying to make it seem like, oh, we found all these ballots that weren't counted by the mean old Republicans. And so the Democrats are really winning. So that if the time comes when the courts rule against the Democrats, which I think in many of the cases they will, then they can say, see, the Republicans stole another election, just like Trump stole 2016. And you have this hysteria and this paranoia that goes on. And that leads to more division and more chaos. And eventually, if we keep going down this road, it leads to civil war, and anarchy, chaos, mobocracy. Everyone against everyone. See, if we have a civil war again, it's not going to be North against South or East against West or one state against another. It's going to be everyone against everyone in every state. It's going to be divided along, ultimately it'll be divided along the lines of principle. Good people, sane people, constitutionalists, Christians, people who want the rule of law. We're going to be on one side. You're going to have the insane people who want a tyranny to collectivize everyone together and force us into, to follow their whims on the other side. And that's where we're going. And that's where John Adams' quote about the political parties dividing us, and that's how it's the greatest threat under our Constitution, right? That's why that sort of a prophecy, basically, is so important to remember. That's why George Washington's farewell address is important to remember when he talked about the baneful effects of party and faction. All we have to do is look at Arizona, Florida, Georgia, the laughing stocks of the country right now. These banana republics, where you have a political class of gangsters who are all Marxist in persuasion, openly backed by Bernie Sanders, backed by George Soros in many cases with their money, and other communists, to see what we're up against. One group is trying to steal power away from another group so that they can ride roughshod over everyone. That's what it's about. So if you live in those areas, and you happen to be listening to this, step forward, let your voice be heard, speak out against this corruption, this institutionalized corruption that happens every election time, magically only in favor of the Democrats. And then the next time you go to vote, don't vote Democrat or Republican. Put your faith in principles instead, and take a stand for what's right, not what's politically expedient. So join me next time for the 14th episode of Liberty Wolf. I will be talking about illegal immigration, this massive invasion that's happening on our borders. So you won't want to miss that. Thank you for being here, and remember to put your principles first. So sic semper tyrannis. Long live liberty.